All right, I'm here to hop on the bandwagon and to have a discussion on evil, because evil with a capital E is all in discussions right now. It is very much in vogue within news media, traditional media, legacy media, if you will. These are all of the discussions right now on X platform, on social media in general, YouTube, and podcast discussions. Everywhere you go, it's a lot of conversations, and I'm going to, in this conversation, avoid using specific terms because, well, on one hand, this can make this a timeless discussion, something that I can look back on in the future and remember that, oh yeah, these are just discussions of general human dynamics that could be talked about and discussed at any era. But also this is apparently an issue on such platforms to use certain figures' names. But if you want an understanding of what I am referencing, I am trying to make this broad, but there is maybe a more specific element, and it rhymes with Einstein, which is kind of too bad because, I'm a fan of Albert Einstein, and I love his work, and I have many discussions about him. And unfortunately, right now, that name is being co-opted by a very similar and adjacent name. Now, I am not going to be someone who plays detective on the internet, who plays political analyst or whatever. So I'm not going to discuss these sorts of things because I am trying my best to avoid reading these very captivating threads or listening to these very in-depth podcasts that are talking and speculating on all of the stuff going on. But I would rather, and this is a little bit to get off my chest too, so I can just kind of, flip this page and get on with my work, which has nothing to do with whatever the fuck is going on with the rest of the world in terms of these sorts of things. But it does in some ways. So I'm going to specifically focus on what I have been working on lately, and will be sharing more and more on my YouTube channel just to kind of get a bit more structured with the type of content that I'm putting out there. If you're going to be a creator in this world, you kind of have to have specifics. Right now, the things that I discuss online are all over the place, which is very much in line with who I am as a person. I'm not trying to fake and be like anyone or follow any social media strategy, although I probably should, because it would help me in many ways in terms of building out my business ideas. Most specifically, and I'm just kind of looking behind the camera here, to give you a sense of the stuff that I'm working on, which this doesn't really give you a sense at all. How about this? This is an intermittent hypoxia chart for one of the longevity health protocols that I have been investigating and trying myself. Here is a sample of a supplement which I am currently writing about, urolithin A, and this is the Timeline brand. And Timeline was unveiled and launched at Davos, the World Economic Forum, in 2020. So there you can start to see the relations, okay? The conversations about the WEF, the World Economic Forum, online are very conspiratorial, are really kind of crazy, and all of these things start to relate to the political realm and the conversations about evil and forces that are working against the individual common person. Okay? This is not my realm. I am not going to be talking or writing about these things, but the things that I pursue inevitably have some sort of a connection because everything is interrelated. To get more specific, because that's kind of vague, recently, all you have to do is search up the name Peter Attia. Peter Attia has been a figure in the longevity realm, in the health realm, really big in podcasts and books. He has, big fat book that's been making the rounds in bookstores, all about health and longevity. And on one hand, I think he's given some really good practical advice. But on the other hand, recently he's been in the conversations around the sort of web of evil that is being uncovered and discussed, as has Brian Johnson, okay? Now, if you want to learn more about these sorts of things, just do your own research, look these names up, but I would say, I don't know if you really need to, okay? Because what I'm trying to parse through, relevant to the gist of this conversation, is the fact that all of us interact with evil on a daily basis, no matter who you are, okay? Now, there are some clear cases. I am not trying to be an apologizer for evil, okay? Yeah, is that the right term? Being an evil apologizer. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, there are different figures right now that are being revealed to have been interacting with other figures that have been connected with some pretty fucking evil shit, okay? That's all I'm going to say about that, because again, this is not my wheelhouse. This is not what I'm trying to research and to learn about. I think anyone who will come across this video on YouTube will have an understanding, because this is all that's being discussed in these spaces currently right now into the second month of 2026, which is the second quarter of the 21st century, and a lot is really going on. Again, talking about universals, I want to remind us all that we all interact with evil on a regular basis. What do I mean by that? Okay, so I'm coming at this from a few different points of view. One from the health point of view, the environmentalist point of view, and just the general point of view of an average person and how we interact with the world. So it is my view that there are evil corporations. And if they're not evil with a capital E, they're pretty darn close. Once you get an organization that gets to a certain scale, it becomes sociopathic, okay? Once an organization is no longer led by a human leadership structure, okay, now all corporations, as far as I know, currently are ran by human beings. But even before the advent of AI, which is the next phase we're going into as we go into the second quarter of the 21st century, when humans systematize things, even going back to the Industrial Revolution and automating different industrial processes, now all of a sudden you have factors at work that are no longer merely human, but are systems, are mechanisms. And once again, going forward from here on out, will be artificial intelligence systems. Things that can run something very similar to a human brain of their own accord. Digitally and what have you, we're not going to discuss whether or not AI has a soul. That's another philosophical discussion. But, you know, we could have been here 100 years ago being philosophers talking about and questioning whether or not, you know, the locomotive train has a soul, okay? And, you know, is it good to rely on this sort of transportation versus horses, which do have a soul, or at least something close to it, right? So going from organic beings to mechanistic things. This is the transition that we've gone through, so in many ways we're not in a unique place right now. Nevertheless, throughout this process of history and where we are currently, more and more when we've offloaded very human things to mechanisms and systems, and in the near-term future AI systems, then we have things that are running that are, you know, that don't have empathy for fellow human beings, that are not thinking about the well-being of our neighbors and our community members, and we no longer will see each other as human beings once you have large-scale corporations and large-scale countries. That is how you can have the machine of war just grind through human beings like we are cannon fodder. You know, we've had this for a very, very, very long time now. And, you know, modern warfare has gotten to the point with drone technology and these sorts of things that it is totally removed from, you know, mano a mano, human to human sort of interactions. And then same with on the business side of things, okay? If you are a chef or, you know, someone mixing a drink, not just alcoholic, but otherwise, and now we're having, you know, reference to like soda companies or any sort of drink company that is not frickin' water, okay? Even water companies, Nestea, owning the rights to water and these sorts of things, charging us money to a human right just for the plastic bottle and some really low-grade water that has been removed from minerals, is full of microplastics and other sorts of things. These systems, to me, are evil. All of us interact with these systems, therefore, we all have almost daily interactions with evil. Now, this is to contrast with people that have ended up having emails released where they're having discussions in private, which is now being made public, where they're talking about things or relating to things that are either being manipulative, abusive, destructive, so on and so forth. In many ways, absolutely nothing is new here, okay? There have been evil cabals of people that have been doing things and running things for a very long time, and I don't so much mean in the conspiratorial side of things. Okay, I'm still under the view today that there is no such evil cabal. You know, to use the Illuminati as the kind of archetypal idea of such a structure, I don't believe that exists. I believe it's more like this distributed sort of thing, and when groups of human beings work together in such a way, you lose empathy for others. And then that is how evil can kind of sort of manifest in these mechanistic, systematic sort of ways. And then that is the world where we end up today. So, you know, maybe one core message of this could be that we, mere mortals, should have empathy as well for the people that are in larger positions than we are, you know, CEOs of companies or public figures or politicians, etc. You know, just because you had an email exchange with people who have nefarious intentions, does not necessarily mean that you yourself are a totally corrupt individual and are totally evil. And again, I'm not trying to be apologetic for any specific people at all. I'm just trying to present my thoughts as it relates to these things, because all of these things have kind of clamped down and have come to bear on things that I have been myself thinking about and getting involved in. And when I say involvement, you know, I'm not getting involved in any supplement companies or longevity gurus, etc. I'm just trying to write about them and document and make content, you know, tracing, for instance, what I've been doing with Timeline is tracing the advent of the supplement urolithin A, which today is becoming, you know, different brands are manufacturing it, and there are generics now going around, and it shows promise for mitophagy, which is the recycling of mitochondria. It's like autophagy, which we know occurs when we fast for cellular renewal. It's the same process, but specifically for mitochondria. And, you know, I just thought, let's write about this. Let's put together a short book documenting this. It's like scientific history and futurism, looking ahead as to what we can expect and what we can do to improve our health. And this to me ties to evolutionary biology, tracing, you know, history. Urolithin A is related to pomegranates and other foods. And I personally have experience with pomegranates from the conservatory at the zoo where I work. You know, this is silly, but kind of meaningful to me. This is bark of a pomegranate tree I just keep beside me as I write about these things to keep me grounded. That's my relation to these topics, okay? But then these topics will relate to things like Davos, which is a political thing, and then now they will relate to figures like Brian Johnson, people in the longevity realm that are now being tied to these like evil cabals going on in the world. So nothing exists in isolation. Therefore, I felt like it was kind of cool to address these sorts of things, to connect the dots. Now, what does that mean for any of us in our individual lives? Well, I don't know. Just be mindful, perhaps. Have empathy for one another and have patience, I suppose, and try to relate things back to ourselves, you know? All human beings are flawed, and that's just how life is. And in today's world, it is nearly impossible to live your life without some sort of an involvement with things approximating evil. Okay, the environmental side of this as well is, you know, I'm filming this on an Apple iPhone. Inside of it are minerals to create the battery and other components of this technology that come from places on Earth that have these minerals. And in many cases, it is easier for these corporations to source these from places where people are using pickaxes to take them out of the ground, and they're, you know, living a pretty shitty existence to do so. Shitty by modern standards. I wouldn't want to dig in these cobalt mines in central Congo, for example, but a lot of people are. And then those minerals go through this global supply chain and end up in all of our technologies. And they not only negatively impact humans having to do that, but also wildlife and plant life, nature in general, which across time makes life on Earth consistently less healthy for all of us. That's fucked up. That is evil. Now, the backbone of how these corporations run these sorts of things, it's complex, okay? It's hard to put the blame on any one individual. For example, Steve Jobs, I take the good and the bad for that figure. I know that he was an asshole to his staff, but I know that he was such a radical innovator that he brought products to the world that have changed the world, and I have benefited from that. On one hand, I admire and respect Steve Jobs. On the other hand, I, look at his flaws and I try to learn how not to be, try to reflect on myself, okay? Steve Jobs also arguably overworked himself, was negative towards his health, which led perhaps to his early departure of this earth. Maybe it was a genetic thing, maybe it wasn't. But those are all things to consider with the complexities of individuals. And this is true of anyone that we are discussing about and thinking about. So one thing all of us can do in this time period where things are becoming radicalized and discussions around evil, people that are involved in such, and debates about how evil is this person? There's evil exists on a gradient, and how are we supposed to parse through these things? Do I throw the baby out with the bathwater kind of thing? Do I avoid, it's similar to longevity, how it's been made into a right-wing movement as well. Different things about health, which I have been interested in for a long time. I'm I agree with this point of view, but then does that now make me a right-wing person? Or worse, a far-right, evil right-wing person? So there's so much nuance around these things, and that's just what I want to discuss here. That's how I'm going to end this, is let's just think about the nuance, All of us can just turn off our phones right now, turn off the media right now. We don't need to learn anything more. We don't need to read any more leaked emails or any more files about whatever the fuck. We don't need any more of that. That's not going to affect our lives individually, you and I. What we need to do is just live our regular lives. There is nature. We have to live according to laws of subsistence. We need to gather food, and what that means is farmers need to produce our food, and so on and so forth, and supply chains and systems need to continue to operate. But within those supply chains and systems are corporations that are, just selling us junk food and taking advantage of us and manipulating us through science. So it's complicated, but these are the pathways that we all navigate. So, are we going to call all of each other out for being associated with evil? Because every single one of us is. We've all been in touch with evil. We're all interacting with evil on a day-to-day basis. We're all interacting with the good as well. It is good versus evil, and we walk the line between the middle of it. It's the yin and the yang, and we stroll that line between both worlds, and none of us are perfect at it, but we need to always remember to do these things. And that, to me, is the philosophy behind all of these things, and that's lost on the reporters and the journalists and the media and the gossipers. That's you and me, the people that gossip about this shit to our friends. We have to start from the basis that The fundamental philosophy of existence is that human beings walk the line between good and evil at all times. And that is the beginning of the dawn of humanity. Once human beings became conscious, which again was a process that existed across time, there's no singular moment for this, and we're talking about hundreds of thousands of years of evolution to get to this point. When human beings gain consciousness and we start to decide on these things and start to look at killing and start to wonder, is this good? Is this bad? Is there an objective good with a capital G? Is there an objective evil with a capital E? And then we put this into religious frameworks, and that is what's helped us understand these things for a long time. In the modern day, we put this into a scientific framework. Now, we can put this into either of those frameworks and some through philosophy and whatever framework that we can kind of use to help understand where we're at as human beings and what to do with the knowledge, the awareness, the consciousness that we have. For good and for ill, it is a blessing and it is a curse to be a human being and to have our conscious awareness that we have. That is the foundational philosophy with which any human endeavor continues from. So we can't continue to jump the gun and have a discussion about evil without stopping to start from the baseline philosophy of where we're at. That's how all political discussions should begin. Any discussion of if we're going to go to war with this country or that country, it needs to start from the basis of we don't know why we're here. We don't know what our exact purpose is as human beings. We maybe don't have a purpose, or maybe we do, or maybe there's something in between. And so since we don't know any better, any decisions that we make as nation states or as communities or as individuals are just kind of like based on vibes, man. We don't know. We're just kind of shooting in the dark here. It's all just based on vibes. And so if we get new information, we can just go down a totally different trajectory, and who cares? But too often we dig ourselves into one rut, and that becomes our ideology, and then we can't steer clear and go into a different direction, although we all should be able to, because at the foundation is just a philosophical view of the world, which is that none of us really know what exactly is right, what exactly is wrong. And that philosophical view is how we should begin all endeavors. And so that is my my conversation, my dialogue, thinking about how we all interact with evil on a day-to-day basis and what we can do with that knowledge. And with that said, I think I'm going to go drink some water and maybe lay down, close my eyes, have maybe a nap for 10 minutes, and then get up and get back to something productive. I'm going to go work out here soon. The weather is beautiful, and life continues on, God damn it.